change lie number 1 exposed. Global warming is bad. Claim: global warming is bad. The claim is that global warming is bad, but is it really? This video will explore the facts surrounding this claim, but there is also a counterclaim that global warming is good. When warming alarmists discuss the topic, they leave out all the reasons why global warming is good. We will include some of these facts in this video so that you will have a more balanced understanding. Fact: we currently live in an ice age. There has been some confusion on this. When the term ice age was first used, we still knew very little about Earth's past. We did not yet know about all of the climate change cycles which have occurred over the last few billion years. We now know, for instance, that the Ice Age did not end 11,600 years ago. In fact, the massive warming back then made civilization suddenly possible. Definition: Ice Age. A period when ice persists throughout the year in both polar regions. It consists of both glacial and interglacial periods. Fact: our current ice age. We now know that our current ice age started 2.6 million years ago. We currently live in one of dozens of interglacial periods of the current ice age, which has consisted of dozens of longer, colder glacial periods and shorter, warmer interglacial periods. The current interglacial is known as the Holocene, and our current Holocene is already older than the average interglacial period. In other words, it's overdue to end. Fact: life thrived when Earth was far warmer. For most of the last 600 million years, during which multicellular life has existed, the climate on Earth has been far warmer than our current ice age. In fact, we could say that life prefers warmth to ice. Wow, too cold, Jack. But not that warm. Ah, that's more like it. Fact: the population gradient from poles to equator demonstrates this preference. The population density at the polar regions is very low, while the population density toward the tropics is consistently higher. Life and biodiversity like it warmer with plenty of water and nutrients. Fact: the population density of Greenland is 0.028 people per square kilometer. Ice is not a very hospitable environment for growing crops or establishing a thriving civilization. In fact, civilization typically comes to a halt during northern winters. Armies hunker down to weather the cold. Farmers don't farm. And builders most frequently don't build. Fact: the population density of Java is 1,121.0 people per square kilometer. That's over 40,000 times that of Greenland. Where there is warmth, water, and nutrients, life tends to thrive. Fact: biodiversity is far higher in warm, wet areas than in cold or hot deserts. Antarctica produces 0 crops. Pretty much the same thing can be said of the Sahara. Discussion: warming is not frightening. The warming alarmists are frightened of a tiny amount of warming, 3 degrees Celsius in 100 years, while every day plants, animals, and people suffer through many times that amount of change. Here's the average warming per day in several cities. Los Angeles, California, 10.8 degrees Celsius average daily warming. Global warming in an ice age sounds good to me. The alternative, global cooling, can be deadly. Corollary claim. It's the rate of warming that matters, not the amount of warming. Let's take a closer look at this claim after we use a blowtorch to cook our lunch. Counterclaim. The rate of warming is insignificant. The rate of warming that is feared is most often quoted as 3 degrees Celsius per century. The daily rate of warming in Los Angeles, when calculated per century, is 401,781.6 degrees Celsius. Thankfully, the warming stops at the end of each day, but the rate is far, far faster than that feared by the warming alarmists. Let's look at it another way. The feared warming, when calculated per day, is 0.0000821 degrees Celsius. This can be barely measured and is impossible to feel. Why are they so frightened about such a tiny amount of daily warming? Fact: the 20th century rate of warming barely changed. The amount of warming from 1910 to 1940 was virtually the same as the amount of warming from 1970 to 2000. And actually it slowed down a bit. Each was a 30-year period. One had very small amounts of CO2 being added to the atmosphere. The latter had massive amounts of CO2 being produced. Discussion. Warming is not unusual. In other words, the late 20th century warming was not unusual and not dangerous. And the CO2 increases could not budge the rate of warming to make it go any faster. So CO2 was not driving global climate. Fact: early 20th century. The amount of warming from 1910 to 1940 was about 0.5 degrees Celsius per 30 years, or 1.67 degrees Celsius per century. Fact: late 20th century. The amount of warming from 1970 to 2000 was about 0.41 degrees Celsius per 30 years, or 1.37 degrees Celsius per century. The rate of warming was somewhat lower, despite the increased abundance of CO2. And let's not forget that the Earth actually cooled from 1940 to 1970, producing scares of a new ice age, despite the fact that we were already living in an ice age. Fact: 1326 BC. About 1326 BC, temperatures rose about 1.4 degrees Celsius per 30 years, based on temperature proxies, more than 3 times the late 20th century warming. Fact: 6140 BC. About 6140 BC, temperatures rose about 1.9 degrees Celsius per 30 years. Fact: 9620 BC. About 9620 BC, at the start of the Holocene interglacial, temperatures rose about 100 degrees Celsius per century for that first decade. That's more than 111 times the entire 20th century rate of warming. Fact: AD 1817. In 1817, recovering from the year without a summer, global climate warmed at an estimated 50 degrees Celsius per century, estimating that it took 2 years to recover from the loss of 1 degree Celsius globally. Corollary claim: Earth's fever. NASA says Earth has a fever. That's not science. It's an appeal to emotion, an anti-science logical fallacy. Fact: Kingsman. NASA says Earth has a fever, But so does Samuel L. Jackson in a silly spy movie. That doesn't make it true. Melting ice does not equal a fever.
When you get a virus, you get a fever. That's the human body raising its core temperature to kill the virus. Planet Earth works the same way. Global warming is the fever. Mankind is the virus. We're making our planet sick. A coal is our only hope. If we don't reduce our population ourselves, there's only one of two ways this can go. The host kills the virus, or the virus kills the host.
Definition: cull. From agriculture, to take out an animal, especially an inferior one, from a herd. From agriculture, to reduce the size of a herd or flock by killing a proportion of its members. To cease to employ, get rid of. Discussion: does Earth really work like the human body? Earth has been far warmer in the past and has had zero ice at the poles. That was no more a fever than the man in the moon is real. Culling the human herd is not a very friendly idea, especially if you were one of the ones being killed, taken out, or gotten rid of. Some, if not all globalists, view most of humanity as inferior. They are eugenicists, and culling the human herd has been on their mind for centuries. Corollary claim: scorched earth. But if the earth warms by 3 degrees Celsius from 1970 levels, it will scorch the earth and civilization will die. Really? Let's look more closely at this claim. Fact: climate change cycles of the Holocene. The Holocene has had 10 major warm periods on a 1,000-year cycle. This is from Greenland ice cores. And Greenland, while not exactly global, is at the heart of the region which controls the switch from glacial period to interglacial period. Fact: medieval warm period. The medieval warm period was about 0.25 degrees Celsius warmer than today, and along with the Little Ice Age, were global phenomena, according to these scientists. Fact: Viking crops in Greenland. The Vikings could grow crops for hundreds of years in Greenland. Today it's too damn cold to grow the same crops. Fact: Viking wine grapes in America. The Vikings found wine grapes growing far north of where they can be found in America today. Historians who do not believe in natural climate change have claimed that the Vikings landed in Massachusetts because of the modern northerly limit on grape growing. Discussion: medieval warm period was global. Signs of the medieval warm period show up in the proxy temperature record for locations all around the planet, including the Southwest Pacific, central Argentina, Tierra del Fuego, southern Patagonia, central Chile, Peru, southeast Uruguay, Venezuela, not to mention North America, Greenland, Europe, and China. Fact: the Roman warm period was about 0.7 degrees Celsius warmer than today. Fact: Minoan warm period was about 1.1 degrees Celsius warmer than today. Fact: Holocene optimum warmth. The far warmer Holocene optimum, which was about 1.1 degrees Celsius warmer than today, and almost never got colder than today's climate, gave us a green Sahara for 3,000 years. Fact: Eemian interglacial. The Eemian interglacial, our sister interglacial, 100,000 years ago, was up to 5 degrees Celsius warmer than today for hundreds of years. Life thrived, sea levels were up to 20 feet higher, and polar bears did just fine. Fact: starved for warmth. The climate of Earth has been starved for warmth for more than 2.6 million years. Forests used to cover Antarctica. Palm trees once decorated the landscape of Greenland, and during those warmer times, the rest of Earth teemed with life. Our modern warmth is tiny compared to past global temperatures. Fact: most warming occurs at the poles. Most of the warming goes to the poles. Even Al Gore's faulty video got this point right. Discussion: no scorching anywhere. If climate were to warm by 10 degrees Celsius globally, the tropics might warm by a degree or two. No scorching here. The hot deserts might warm by 2 to 3 degrees Celsius. So what if we set a new record in Phoenix, Arizona of 53 degrees Celsius? Most of the year, citizens will love their climate. With the greater warming, some deserts will shrink or disappear, like the Holocene Optimum when the Sahara was green for 3,000 years. Some people actually wouldn't mind not shoveling snow. Temperate zones, say 40 degrees north, might get 3 to 4 degrees Celsius of warming. So the average high of Minneapolis might go from 12.9 degrees Celsius to 16.9 degrees Celsius. That's 55.2 degrees Fahrenheit to 62.4 degrees Fahrenheit. And the polar deserts blossom with life for the first time in millions of years. So where's the scorching? Could warming alarmists have merely made it up to get people excited? NASA said fever. Some fever. Some planet. Corollary claim: disease vectors. But with warmer climate, more mosquito-borne diseases will be able to spread all over the place. That's another claim by some warming alarmists. Fact: early 20th century outbreak near Arctic Circle.
It is also suggested that even a mild rise in temperature will lead to the spread northward of deadly insect-borne tropical diseases like malaria. But is this true? Professor Paul Reiter of the Pasteur Institute in Paris is recognized as one of the world's leading experts on malaria and other insect-borne diseases. He is a member of the World Health Organization Expert Advisory Committee, who's chairman of the American Committee of Medical Entomology of the American Society of Tropical Medicine, and lead author on the health section of the U.S. National Assessment of the Potential Consequences of Climate Variability. As Professor Reiter is eager to point out, mosquitoes thrive in very cold temperatures.
Mosquitoes are not specifically tropical. Most people will realize that in temperate regions there are mosquitoes. In fact, mosquitoes are extremely abundant in the Arctic. The most devastating epidemic of malaria was in the Soviet Union in the 1920s. There were something like 30 million cases a year and something like 600,000 deaths. A tremendous catastrophe that reached up to the Arctic Circle. Archangel had 30,000 cases and about 10,000 deaths. So it's not a tropical disease, yet these people in the global warming fraternity invent the idea that malaria will move northward. I was horrified to read the second and third assessment reports because there was so much misinformation without any kind of recourse or virtually without mention of the scientific literature, the truly scientific literature by specialists in those fields.
Corollary claim: sea level rise. But global warming will disrupt parts of civilization with rising sea level. Discussion: agree, but... Yes, I agree, but global cooling is far worse. With sea level rise, people will have to move. With global cooling, billions of people could starve to death. I don't know about you, but moving sounds far more appealing than starving to death. Corollary claim: precautionary principle. It would be far better to do something about global warming, even if it isn't a problem. Taking precautionary measures sounds reasonable, doesn't it? Discussion: disagree and... Would you jump off a cliff just to be doing something? I hope you're not that stupid. Destroying industry in the hopes of solving something that may not even be a problem is not a very smart move. Crippling industry and destroying the modern lifestyle could end up killing millions. Disease had been eradicated largely by modern methods of hygiene, good food, and clean water. But all of the improvements in life required energy to make them work. So jump off a cliff if you want to, but don't expect the rest of us to follow you. Comparing global cooling. We've taken a look at global warming, its benefits, and some of the misconceptions. Now let's take a look at how global cooling compares. Fact: 1816, year without a summer. In 1815, Mount Tambora in present-day Indonesia erupted, sending tons of volcanic ash into the atmosphere. This came 1 year after the eruption of Mayon Mountain in the Philippines. The following year, global temperatures were nearly 1 degree Celsius cooler. Thousands died from the cold and failed crops. Thousands more became climate refugees. The areas hardest hit were from Central and Western Europe
to New England and Eastern Canada.
But there were also problems in India, Russia, China, and Japan. This was the year Mary Shelley and her friends were locked in a Swiss villa overlooking Lake Geneva. The dreary summer weather forced them to find other ways of biding their time. Mary Shelley ended up writing Frankenstein. Fact: Dark Ages. The 6th century saw a continuation of the post-Roman warm period cooling trend. This was aggravated by multiple volcanic eruptions, which led to the Great Cooling Event of 535 to 536, with similarly cold events occurring in 540 to 541 and another one in the early 550s. Fact: Vikings. At the bottom of the Dark Ages cold spell, about AD 790, about 1/4 of a degree Celsius cooler than the bottom of the Little Ice Age, the Norsemen of Scandinavia became rowdy and desperate. They raided peoples farther south because their lands had grown too cold to grow their own crops. Even after climate improved, these Vikings had become acclimated to travel, exploration, and theft. During the medieval warm period, Vikings conquered a part of Gaul later known as Normandy, and these Normans went on to conquer England and Sicily. They set up homes all along the rivers of East Europe, becoming the Kievan Rus, from whom the people of Belarus and Russia claim their ancestry. Viking mercenaries were considered far more trustworthy than Byzantine soldiers, and thus the Varangian Guard was established to protect the East Roman Emperor. The great cold of the early medieval Dark Ages had given birth to the ruling class of a large part of Europe, from London to Moscow. Fact: Greeks. The Minoan warm period ended with a 200-year cooling of about 1.1 degrees Celsius. In about 1100 BC, temperatures hit rock bottom and bounced only very slightly. Greek pottery showed signs that people didn't have the time or resources to paint the elaborate decorations of Mycenaean culture that had come before. There were widespread signs of famine. Cities became abandoned. The Greek Dark Ages lasted until about 800 BC, 300 years of struggle. Fact: Chinese. China has suffered numerous famines. Some of them can be directly related to major cooling periods. The first Great Famine took place AD 875 to 884 and led to a peasant rebellion. The next Great Famine occurred at the end of the medieval warm period as global climate was cooling down significantly, AD 1333 to 1337. And another Great Famine occurred at the depths of the Little Ice Age in northwestern China, 1630 to 1631, leading to the eventual collapse of the Ming Dynasty in 1644. Famines in 1810, 1811, 1846, and 1849 left an estimated 45 million dead. The Taiping Revolution and drought occurred right at the end of the Little Ice Age, 1850 to 1873, leaving over 60 million people dead. Fact: Cooling means more violent storms. If you understand the simple physics of wind, you know that putting great cold right next to great heat is a perfect recipe for strong winds.
This is purely propaganda. Every textbook in meteorology is telling you the main source of weather disturbances is the temperature difference between the tropics and the pole. And we're told in a warmer world, this difference will get less. Now that would tell you you'll have less storminess, you'll have less variability, but for some reason, that isn't considered catastrophic, so you're told the opposite.
The first director and founder of the Climatic Research Unit at East Anglia University, Dr. Hubert Lamb, did research on Little Ice Age storminess. He found that the colder climate contained far more violent storms than the numbers seen in the 20th century. This should not surprise us. Moving polar cold closer to equatorial heat will only increase the thermal gradient. Just 12 years after Dr. Lamb's death, the Climatic Research Unit made controversial news with the ClimateGate emails, with proof that the then current Climatic Research Unit director, Phil Jones, and colleagues had conspired to fudge scientific data. Their programmer's coding comments confirm this allegation by providing the details of fraudulent intent. Perhaps it's just as well that Dr. Lamb did not live to see such corruption of his baby. Fact: Cooling means more droughts and deserts. The warming alarmists say that global warming leads to more droughts and deserts, but the opposite is true. You have to realize that land never gets any water unless there is evaporation. Less evaporation means less water to go around for rain. And when it's colder, you get far less evaporation. Discussion: Glacial period deserts. During the last glacial period, deserts were larger and more plentiful. The glacial mountain that covered virtually half of North America and a third of Europe was entirely a desert region. Right now, the largest deserts are Antarctica and the Arctic region. The Sahara Desert comes in third. A desert is defined as a region with very little precipitation. Cold polar regions have very little snow. All of that mountain of glacial coverage took thousands of years to accumulate. Surrounding the enlarged polar region, you have more desert that used to be forests and grassland. During the last glacial period, human population could never get above 100,000. Why? Because rain was deadly scarce and rain is essential to agriculture and to growing crops. This is why civilization was impossible until the current interglacial. Thermophobia, shining a light on global warming. On the cover of my book, Thermophobia, I show a picture of wet leaves surrounded by dry, cracked earth. The green signifies global warming, the cracked and dry earth, global cooling, plus rare rain and starvation. So if you love life, you'll promote global warming. The climate always changes, and we will get either cooling or warming. Cooling promotes death, warming promotes life, at least as long as we remain in an ice age.